So I would say one of the most common reasons why we are brought in is to stabilize during a staffing transition. And we see that happen at every level of organizations. So we see staffing transitions with small organizations, organizations with, let's say, 10, 20 employees. And we're brought in because maybe an employee hasn't let their boss know that they're looking to leave, but they know they're looking to leave, and or they're already feeling kind of overwhelmed with their job, and they really want to stabilize IT, get that off of their plate, and they're kind of feeling bad about, maybe where they are with their relationship with their boss, and they don't want the whole ship to sink when they leave. So they work to bring us in. So we do see that happen often, and we do have entry level plans where if they still want to do a lot of the day to day, but have us as a backup, we have um, basic plans starting out at $37 per endpoint that allow them to have that flexibility where they can still do a lot of the end user facing tasks and then have us as a backup. So that's been a common approach where we are kind of brought in that second position in a small firm because somebody is looking to put in their resignation or retire, and they're just kind of planning ahead. And that allows us to get in and mentor under the person, document the environment, which oftentimes the primary person hasn't had a chance to do much documentation or really even requirement to, because they've been doing the day-to-day support. Um, and bringing on another person means that there is a requirement for some sort of written documentation. So we get that out of the way, and kind of bring in some standard best practices. So whether we're the long-term fit or just another, stepping stone in the evolution of the organization, that more standard IT practices are put in place. So it's easier for other people to come in and pick up the documentation and pick up more standardized routines than maybe a one-off custom thing that somebody did. And then just help the organization plan through that transition. So that might involve, um, handing off our documentation to a new employee if that person is eventually hired, or um, helping go through an RFP process, or helping interview qualified staff, even if we're just a stepping stone in that process. That's definitely a common thing. So even at a very small organization level where somebody doesn't have an IT director, or uh, any formal IT staff, it's that finance person or the office manager who's been handling IT that's maybe thinking about retiring or getting a promotion, and we're kind of brought in to backfill. So that's very common. Um, Another transition that we see a lot more of these days, uh, a lot of IT businesses are getting bought up by private equity. There's a lot of baby boomers that started businesses that are looking to retire. They're looking to sell their business, and we see more and more that companies are getting fired. So in this scenario, um, the business that we end up doing business with has been fired by their MSP. In other words, the MSP has come to them and said, that old contract that you had that you were grandfathered in on, we're no longer going to support that. You're not in alignment with our tools. We want to sell you more cybersecurity tools. We're no longer selling you this limited support plan. We want to sell you our cover everything support plan. Whatever that scenario is, sometimes a big price increase, same work, but big price increase because we've been bought out by private equity and they have to pay for the loan. So a lot of different scenarios there. But we do see that more and more often where where basically the organization has been given oftentimes 30 days notice that they need to find a new MSP, and that can be fairly stressful. Arguably 30 days notice is better than 2 weeks notice that you might have with an internal employee. And usually an MSP to MSP transfer, there is more documentation and there is more structure around that. An internal employee doesn't have the same professional liability that a service provider would have, doesn't have documentation usually in place to work as a team. So we do see MSP to MSP transfers usually going better than employee to employee or employee to MSP transfers. But it's still stressful to get a 30 days notice and have to scramble. It's not uncommon in our industry that people have had relationships with an MSP for 8, 10, 15 years, sometimes even longer. So, I mean, that's a lot to process through, a lot of inside knowledge that has to be rebuilt in a short amount of time because of a retirement or something like that. I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, and the one that comes right to the top of mind when you mentioned that was a gentleman who was let go from a state agency. He was an employee for the agency first, and then he became a contractor. And he had been between the two roles at the agency, he had been there for 27 years. And he was getting terminated by the state agency. They were just very frustrated that he was behind, on projects and other things for years. Like it just was unreconcilable. Everybody was very frustrated. They couldn't get their work done. Equipment was breaking all the time, and he was getting let go. And the CEO that was making that decision, she was a new leader to the agency and had tried to work with him for maybe 2 years, trying to get things on track, and then had to make the decision to let him go. And she was very worried that he was going to hold them hostage and wasn't going to collaborate, wasn't going to share passwords, was potentially going to mic drop and just walk off with them locked out of all the systems. And he really had things locked down. You couldn't do anything there without him coming to your keyboard and helping you get the slightest change made to change a printer where you were printing. It was very locked down. So when all of this was shared with us, the agency actually had its own kitchen, because they were helping look after at-risk youth. And we actually worked with the kitchen staff to bake a cake and have a little party during the transition. We had a 3-day transition period with the person getting let go, and we learned that it was actually his work anniversary, his 27th year work anniversary, one of the days in the morning. So we worked with the kitchen staff to get a cake baked, and be able to have our technicians and him sit around the table and all talk about we're all in the trenches together supporting these systems, and look at all the things that he built and he had done well, and thank him for his work and thank him for the transition. And at the end of we started, I think, on a Wednesday, and we were wrapping up on the Friday, and the executive director of the agency said that went a lot better than I thought it was going to be. We did get passwords. We were able to understand some of the basic routines. We didn't have a lot of time, 3 days, but we were able to do a knowledge transfer with him and have a constructive dialogue. So we just really try to make these professional. We also try not to ask it's not our first rodeo. So in other words, we know how most of these things operate. So sometimes we do need to be walked through a process, but a lot of times, just some basic instructions, some basic credentials, and we're up to speed with how that particular routine works. So it's usually a little less stressful for a departing IT professional to let us know how to run something, because we do have a team of people and we're not green, and it's not like HR just hired somebody that was able to be the fastest on the keyboard but doesn't really know what's going on. This is all sort of tried and true with other technical people testing the metals of the technicians that are being hired and doing these things. So we usually get up to speed pretty quickly. But that's the one that really came up, because going into that with just 3 days and with all the emotions that the director and the person getting terminated seemed to have, we were worried. Well, in regulation, there's kind of the paperwork admin side of things, and then there's the real technical side of things. So you want to have a technically solid system, and then you also want to have your paperwork in order. And those are two separate skill sets. And here at Ian Computers, we do have a regulatory and compliance person who is dedicated to more that paperwork side of things and making sure that the regulations are being interpreted correctly. So we want to make sure that all of the policies and the documentation of how systems should be configured to provide compliance is in order. So obviously, if documentation is out of date and not representative of the environment anymore, which is really easy to do, you do a system upgrade and you don't necessarily circle back around and update all of your documents. That is something that you need to really keep on top of. On the system configuration side, if you're operating older technology and newer technology, or a lot of different siloed systems, there's really no replacement other than looking at the regulation rule book and going through each of those systems manually and doing a spot check, right? Because there's going to be drift if the regulation says to keep a 7-year archive, for example, and you have multiple systems, you might have to check and see if that's actually been put in place across multiple systems, or if there's maybe gaps. Maybe you got a new system and the archiving tool wasn't deployed to that system. So that is a manual process. So what I really like that's happened here recently is that a lot of our customers do use Microsoft for most of their business. So they use Microsoft for file storage, for Word, Excel, for email, for Teams. And you can use the Purview Compliance Manager. You can apply your regulatory framework, and then it will automatically tell you in many cases whether your configuration in the Microsoft 365 tenant is to the standard. And if there is drift, it will show you where that drift occurred, and it'll adjust the rating of your compliance accordingly. So and then it gives you step-by-step instructions on how to get back into compliance. And if it's a compliance thing that Microsoft can't handle for you, like let's say, physical security controls or something like that, it allows you to mark that system as met, unmet manually, and upload evidence so that you get one place to manage where you're at. So that is a really powerful tool that I find that most people don't know that they already have access to. With the more advanced Microsoft licensing, it's there. It's pretty easy to use. And, so it's also within 30 seconds or within 5 minutes, right? You apply the framework, it rates the tenant, and you start getting actionable information within 5 minutes of just logging in and looking around. So it allows you to kind of shortcut all of the traditional steps of expensive gap assessments and everything else to see where you are with your program. It works very similarly to the Secure Score, but it's the compliance manager under Microsoft Purview. So Purview is the compliance module, but it's the same sort of concept. So the Secure Score gives you a score and weighted recommendations, but the Secure Score is kind of Microsoft's own framework, and then the compliance manager uses let's say the Security Exchange Commission's framework or the cyber maturity model certification for the Department of War framework. So it's going to be using one of those national, international, or governing bodies like accountants or those types of organizations, one of their frameworks.
Great. And do you know anyone who's, number one, they weren't aware they had it, they had access to that data, you informed them, and then they not only saw the benefits, but they were able to implement things on their own, or is it things that EN Computers implements?
Both. So if somebody has IT staff, they're able to use that compliance manager as a project manager. In fact, you can assign who is doing that responsibility in the tool so that a manager, on the business side can use that tool to see the IT project through. So we have had IT teams implement off of that compliance manager tool. And then for folks that don't have IT resources in-house or aren't, we sometimes will even use that tool to coach other MSPs. But if the client doesn't have IT staff or an IT resource, then we can do the implementation for them, and we can use that same tool for clarity. So you can see that we're actually getting the work done instead of just try to look at tickets or trust that the work is getting done. Because let's face it, a lot of the controls, they're fairly cryptic, that a user isn't going to really know if IT has implemented FIPS validated encryption on their network, right? So it's nice to be able to look at something that is, actually where the data is being stored and get a report back that the work is being done and it hasn't been missed. Yes. So we were working with a new customer. They were about a 50-person financial services firm, and they were struggling with what to do with a firewall, where they were needing to purchase additional licensing for that firewall to get their users to be able to work from home, some VPN licensing. So they were needing to consider that. They had also had some concerns about that particular firewall appliance because it was getting older and getting a little out of date, and they really hadn't budgeted for a replacement of the device. And the way the existing device was set up, they actually had bought two firewalls that were sort of working together in tandem as a team, which seemed a little overkill. So the gut feeling from the team was, oftentimes you don't know what the people want, but you know what they have before. So the gut feeling is to just, either quote the upgrade for the licensing and sort of double down on the existing system, or maybe just requote the existing system sort of as built with this complex teaming approach, which is very expensive to build out. So we started kind of going down that path, and then we put our heads together and said, hey, let's actually back up and ask the customer what they want to get out of this system, you know, and how much pressure is there on the budget? We knew that this wasn't planned, and we knew we had things like maybe refurbished equipment, maybe lower specifications, or there's a lot of different strategies. So really, you know, we had some example quotes ready, but slowing down and having a conversation about what are your requirements really helped us help the client understand what they were getting, what some of the risks were, and some of the opportunities were, and enabled us to right size what they are going to get going forward versus just rushing into kind of keeping the lights on, which was, feeding the IT monster of all this complexity that really wasn't needed. So, that was something where they really complimented us for slowing down and having the conversation with them about what the business requirements were first.